Is the best case scenario today for sitting Prime Minister Lapid a stalemate, one that basically just stops Netanyahu from forming a new government, keeps Lapid on as interim? I mean, what are the realistic prospects for a Lapid-led government actually being formed out of this?
The best case scenario would be if his bloc wins 61 or more. I wouldn't rule it out, but I'm not sure it's likely.
Yeah.
I think what you're alluding to is this. The polls last week all showed a 60-60 tie, and that is clearly a mathematical possibility in a situation where the Knesset has an even number of seats. The odd thing about Israel's system is that if no government can be formed, which is implicit in the 60-60 tie, then the interim government remains until the next election and perhaps until the election after that. There is no theoretical limit to how long Lapid can serve as interim prime minister. It can go on for as long as he lives. Same as a baseball game in the United States, which can theoretically never end into the 70th inning until all the players keel over.
Right. If or when we see this combination of far-right parties get a significant chunk of the parliament right now, is the international community going to say, hey, look, Israel, finally extremist Israel exposes itself for what it is? Is this a concern? I mean, is this where the focus will all be, on the far right, no matter what happens here?
It'll be a big focus. I mean, remember that when in Germany, the Alternative for Germany, the equivalent of this Israeli far-right party, got about 13-14% a few years ago, there was some concern around the world. In Israel, the stakes are weirdly higher for a smaller country.
Right.
So, yes,
the light's brighter.
There is a certain cynical fashion of viewing things as never changing and everything's the same, and it's just, again, a question of Bibi yes or Bibi no. Not quite so. I think for the first time, because of this far-right party being so strong, it seems poised to get 1 in 7 votes, meaning 1 in 3 or 4 on the right. The next government in Israel will be truly authoritarian. Now, if you zoom out a little bit, we're living in a moment in history where there is a genuine conflict between those countries that essentially support the democratic, liberal, post-World War II order that has largely kept the peace in the world, and a new version of the right that is really disruptive and quite authoritarian. And there is a sense that if Netanyahu wins this time, because of his total dependence on a party that will get about half the votes that we could get, he will have to go many steps in the direction of what that party wants. And what that party wants is encouragement of Arabs to emigrate from Israel, expulsion of people, mostly Arabs, who prove themselves disloyal. Many people in that party want religious law to prevail over secular law. They have a major wing in that party that is openly homophobic. They want death penalty applied pretty widely. I mean, it's going to be very significant.
With Dan said no, and also I want to respond to what you said, because you gave examples. I can give you an example of Italy. I know Mrs. Meloni. I even spoke to her 3 months ago, and she is the head of the conservative bloc in the European Parliament. And when she came to power, fascist Mussolini, the whole danger, and everyone was shocked that she was elected. And after one speech she made, now everybody thinks it's okay.
There's a lot of risk at the threshold, and at this point that risk seems to be all on the anti-Netanyahu side of the spectrum. I mean, with a list of parties that could drop off, what are the main issues that we're watching play out today?
Well, Israel has a high electoral threshold, meaning if you don't get 3.25%, which is 4 seats out of 120, you don't get into the Knesset, your seats are wasted. We have a remarkable situation here. Unlike, by the way, in previous elections where the right was splintered, that all 5 parties that are right around that threshold and theoretically could fall beneath it are essentially in a center-left Arab bloc, and that's the 3 Arab parties and Meretz and Labor. A high turnout probably endangers them because most of those parties have a ceiling that they can, numerically, that they can't go beyond. As the threshold rises in terms of the number of votes needed, they could fall beneath. 5 parties are in danger, and if 1 or 2 of them don't make it into the Knesset, Netanyahu is the next prime minister. End of story. Therefore, unless the increased turnout that is being reported is mostly in the Arab sector, which would then help the left, I think Lapid may be in trouble.
The 5th election now, as we're framing it within the last 4 years, is the real issue, getting people to still buy in, to go vote, to participate at this point.
So the question is stability or representativity. I believe that in Israel the threshold should be 1%. If we go on proportional election and every part of the population to be represented, so it must be every part of the population represented, and if you get enough votes for a seat, you are entitled to get get the seats. Otherwise, you get artificial results.
Here's the problem. I tend to agree. Israel's situation is too crystallized to enable a majority coalition to form around any one thing. That's why I ended up having the yes Bibi, no Bibi dichotomy, because people seek a dichotomy. You need a dichotomy, and you have a basic binary situation in Israel. In the end, you have liberal people and you have conservative religious people. So I would say the parliament, if we're going to reform the system, should be indeed super representative, and you should have a separate election for the executive. Runoff election with a direct election for two people who would run for president. That would make stable government and also representation. But I have to say, there's so much at stake here that the fact that we'll end up having probably an unstable government is rather a tragedy for Israel. I mean, it's looking like a best-of-7 series in these elections. And the trade-off is this. If the right should somehow win today, Israel will have stable government. Michael's right. Lapid doesn't have an easy path to forming a government unless he does a unity government, which he can't do with Netanyahu without losing face. However, if the right wins, Israel will be seen by the world as having entered that realm of authoritarian democracies represented by Erdogan and Orban and the leaders of Poland and Bolsonaro and Trump in the U.S. And that is not a happy club to be in. It increases your risk factor. And one more thing, if I may, real quickly. The number one goal, if we're to believe Netanyahu's partners, and also hints from Netanyahu himself, for the next government, should it be right-wing, is to pass an override clause to enable the parliament to essentially cancel results of the decisions of the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court is pretty much the only body in Israel that preserves the rights of the Palestinians even a little bit. And should that happen, and should they have no recourse legally for various ways in which they feel oppressed, I think you're increasing the risk of a third intifada. And if that happens, people will come to rue this day of election.
Our problem with Supreme Court is not the decision with citizens, Israeli, Jewish, Arab, even Palestinians. The question is their interference in the government political issues.
Is it a significant factor then, still Netanyahu on trial? What do you think, Don?
It seems to not affect the election. No. I mean, Netanyahu has so delegitimized the process against him that his supporters no longer seem to care. And that's a big success, because originally polls suggested that about 10% would shift. Yeah. But at this point, it's almost immaterial. And I have to say, one of the failures of the legal system is that the trial's dragged on for as long as it has.
One may say that the jury of the public opinion acquitted Netanyahu.
Half the public.
Most of the public, majority of the public.
I would respectfully beg to differ. For some time now, the trial. I mean, there was a point where, wow, this was a new development. Around elections now.
Well, by the way,
at the end of the day, the claims against Netanyahu are that he influenced the television channel, which never anybody was tried in the world, not in Israel, for it, and some bottles of champagne.
Hold on. Michael, I'm sorry.
Red champagne. Red champagne.
More like
the
claims against him are that he essentially asked billionaires seeking favors for hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of jewelry, coats.
No, he didn't.
That appears in the indictment. And cigars and champagne.
These are the issues about the trials there. Michael Kleiner,
hundreds of thousands.
The example is America. Politicians always they magnify trials against politicians. You remember the emails with Hillary, half of America shouting.
In a microframe box. Michael Kleiner, Dan Perry. Thanks for breaking it down. We go to cast our votes here the fifth time. No surprise why, perhaps, to our viewers.
I've said my piece.
I have to go to Bianca Zanini, our correspondent, who's taking questions from viewers.